Super. I've enabled captions, so hopefully that'll help people understand my Scottish accent. And yeah, if audience attendees could keep their mics and cameras off so that we can focus on the lovely panelists. We've also got the Panorama director, Sebastian, here with us, and he's going to hide away in the background and answer any questions that you might have that pop up throughout the session. Essentially, yeah, using the Q&A function that you can see at the bottom of the screen there. You're welcome to use that throughout the session. Just pop any question that comes into your head at any point in there, and then Sebastian will either answer them in real time or we'll save them for the Q&A panel. So yeah, just to introduce myself, I'm Katya. I'm the manager of the Panorama DTP, and I actually started with Panorama as the EDI officer a year ago. So we ran these webinars last year, and that was something that I ran then. And yeah, as I said, we've got Sebastian, our director, and then we have all of our lovely panelists. If it's okay, I'm gonna get you guys to introduce yourselves now, and then I will give a little presentation on Panorama and what a DTP is and what our recruitment processes look like. And then we'll hand over to the panelists to answer any questions that come up. Does that sound good? Okay, so Abby, you are top on my screen, so if you wouldn't mind starting, that would be great.
Sure. Hi, I've frozen. I'm Abby. I'm a first year PhD, so I started in October. I'm based at the University of Leeds, and my PhD is looking at climate of the past to see how it can inform the future.
Super. Thank you. And Hannah, you're next, going clockwise.
Hi everyone, I'm Hannah. I'm also a first year PhD student. I also started in October. I'm based in the School of Geography at Leeds, and my PhD is looking at glacier collapse.
Great. And Felipe, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, you're next on my screen.
Thank you. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Felipe. I'm a second year PhD student, and my project has to do with hydrogeology, particularly contaminant migration in groundwater. And I'm based in the University of Leeds as well.
Great. And Eve, you're next, if that's all right.
Hi, I'm Eve. I'm also a first year PhD student. I'm based at Whitegall, so at the University of York. Sorry, I currently have a cold. And I'm looking at SO2 and its impact on climate and pollution.
Awesome, thank you. And last but not least, Veronica, if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah, that's fine. Hello, I'm Veronica. I'm a second year PhD student at the University of Leeds, and my PhD project is on cold spells in the Northern Hemisphere.
Great, thank you. So yeah, for all the attendees, you can see we've got quite a range of different PhDs that are on offer. Thanks to all the panelists for being here, and thanks to all the attendees for coming along as well. Hopefully this is useful for you. I'm going to now start the little presentation I have on Panorama, if I can work out Zoom. Can everybody now see that? We good? Yeah. Excellent. Hopefully this all works. Yeah, so thanks everyone for coming again. We are the NERC Panorama DTP, and we are based at the University of Leeds, but we also have students based at the Universities of York and Hull as well. Basically, I thought I would start off by describing what a doctoral training partnership is, because for many people who are at that kind of stage of applying for a PhD, it's very different to applying for undergraduate, and there are a lot of different funding models. And a DTP, a doctoral training partnership, is essentially a type of funding model where rather than you getting an individual studentship at maybe your university and that being it, a doctoral training partnership is a consortium of universities or schools or departments that come together, and we basically fund whole cohorts of PhD students rather than just individual studentships. So we take on around 24 PhD students a year. And so within our funding model, we also, as well as providing your stipend and your fees, and I'll go into the detail of that later, we also provide you with a training program and another layer of support within your PhD studentship. So it's a very distinct type of funding model that exists here in the UK. And it's basically an initiative run by the UKRI, which is the big umbrella organisation for all the different research councils based within the United Kingdom. We've got the logos of the individual research councils here on the bottom of the screen, and we are funded by NERC, which stands for the Natural Environment Research Council, which means that our DTP is focused on all research areas to do with environmental sciences. And as I've said, we're partnerships between different universities. In our case, that's the universities of Leeds, York, and Hull. So you'd be based at one of those three universities, and we provide you with fully funded PhDs, including stipend, training, and fees. Oh, I've basically already covered this, but just to reiterate it, especially for international students, it basically means that our three partners and universities are based in Yorkshire in the north of England, at Leeds, York, and Hull. And to touch base on the kind of themes that our projects are on, we kind of have a not just environmental sciences focus, but we kind of look at sub-themes of atmosphere and climate, living world, and earth processes. To go in a little bit more detail on the partners that we have, as I've said, the University of Leeds is our kind of main host partner for the doctoral training partnership. We're actually mostly based within one of the schools, which is the School of Earth Environment, highlighted there in red. And then our other partners at Leeds are the schools of biology, chemistry, civil engineering, geography, and maths. And then, as Eve mentioned there, she's based at the University of York in the Department of Chemistry, and there's a specific atmospheric chemistry lab there called WACL. That is our partner at the University of York. So if you're doing atmospheric chemistry, you're likely to be based there. And then we also have a partner with Hull, with the Energy and Environment Institute. There's another element to DTPs that we basically, one of our focuses is to have strong links with industry and think about your careers after your PhD. So we encourage as many projects as possible to be linked with what we call a case partner. And this essentially is maybe an industry or a government department or a charity linking in with the academic supervisor and the project and providing extra funding for research costs and a placement. So we try to offer as many of these as possible, and a large percentage of our projects that are on offer have case partners. And this provides the additional benefits. And so these are a few of the logos of case partners that we've got projects with or have had projects with. But the details of whether a particular project has a case partner or not it's all listed on our projects page on our website. But if a particular project that you're applying to doesn't already have a case partner and you would like one, you can definitely get that. If you have a strong link with industry or a link with a partner that you have in mind, that's the kind of thing that can be introduced partway through your PhD as well. So to go into a bit more of the detail of what you get if you get a Panorama DTP studentship, as I mentioned, it's a fully funded studentship. We fund you for 3.5 years. And we give you a stipend at the UKRI rate, which is around 18,600 a year at the moment. That tends to increase every year. And it's benchmarked, so we follow that rate. And that is essentially a grant that covers your living costs for anyone who's not familiar with the term stipend. And note that you don't pay tax on that stipend. So it's not treated the same as income. It's not treated the same as a salary. In other countries, I know in Europe, if you're a PhD student, you sometimes are treated like staff and you get a salary, and then you pay council tax and you pay income tax. Here in the UK, we don't do things like that. So you get a stipend, but it's tax-free. And we also pay all university fees, regardless of whether you're home or international, we pay those fees for you. And then we offer each student a research training and support grant. That's £7,000, and that's to last you throughout your PhD, and that's to pay for things like fieldwork or equipment or conferences that you might want to go to. We also have a placement scheme where each student can apply for £1,500 to go towards a placement. And we offer, as I said, cohort-based training. So we have a calendar of training events where students in your cohort will come together to do skills or personal development training. And yeah, we've got at least 24 studentships available for this year. And the application deadline is the 5th of January. So to talk a little bit about how you could find a project with us, because the recruitment processes for PhDs vary across even different NERC DTPs. For us, you can only apply to one project within the Panorama DTP, so choose wisely. All of our projects are available online. As I've mentioned, if they have a little case tag on them, that means that they're a collaborative award in science and technology, and that means you have this external partner attached to the project. And basically your research training and support grant gets an annual top up, and you get the opportunity of doing a fully funded placement with the partner. Our projects page is searchable with little tags or research themes or keywords, so have a good browse. We also have a find a PhD page where a lot of the projects are on there too. So check both of those out. And if you're interested in a project, one of the top tips I can give you is to get in touch with the supervisor. It's really useful to get a sense of what the project's actually going to be about by getting in touch with them. And we've got a bit of guidance online how to do that if you are a bit nervous about approaching an academic. And I'm going to provide the slides afterwards, but we have a bunch of other resources on our website, and we'd really encourage you to make use of those as well. And also that's our email address if you've got any questions as well. So a kind of brief overview of the recruitment process for this year. The initial stage, which you guys will be at if you're looking to apply with us, is to do your online application. And all of our applications are processed through the University of Leeds. So regardless of wherever you're going to be based or wherever the project's based, you would be applying through the University of Leeds. And you have to provide a bunch of documents and degree transcripts and things like that. And just to note, we take academic references, but we also take professional references because we encourage people who've maybe had a bit of work experience that shows that they've got potential for research or PhD study to apply as well. So it doesn't have to just be you have a master's and you've had an academic supervisor who can provide a reference for you. We're more open about the references that we accept and the experience that we accept. Then there's the shortlisting stage where we have different panels for each of the partners, essentially, to get the expertise that we need to just do that initial shortlisting filtering stage. And then we have our interview structure, and all of our interview questions are competency based. So you might find it helpful to use the STAR technique if you get to that stage, and you're scored independently in each question. And we take a large component of the interview score, but also a component of the paper application towards your final score. And those interviews will be in late February or early March. And the final point that I should make here is that we are completely open to applications from both the United Kingdom and from abroad, but we are limited by the government on how many international students we can accept to 30% per year. So that's why on the previous slide, I said we have at least 24 studentships, but if it's exactly 24, the maximum that we can accept from abroad is 7 because of this rule. And it's unfortunate for the international students, but unfortunately we have to comply with that rule. Just want to make everyone aware of that. I won't go into loads of detail on the interview process because normally we host another webinar later on in the year that goes into a lot of detail on this for people who get through to that stage. But essentially, we've really thought about our recruitment processes and we've tried to make them as equitable as possible. So our interview structure is a little bit different to what you might expect. We have 3 short interviews with a pair of panelists on each, with the idea that if you're not just sampling the academic skills, there's one of those interviews is focused on the academic project itself, and the other 2 are focused on personal skills that you might need to do a PhD. So it's a bit of a broader scope that we're looking at. And it also means that if you feel that you've not done very well in one of the interviews, you've still got another 2 opportunities to have a go. And it means that, yeah, we're considering skills that are maybe not as obvious from your paper record, and looking at a lot of soft skills that are important for research, because it's a very different environment to taught or undergraduate study. And these are either at the partner that you would be applying to, like where the project's based, or we offer online interviews as well. And for people who are traveling, we pay travel expenses up to, I think, £150 or £100. I need to double check, but we do pay travel for people who'd like to attend in person and have a look at the department. Oh, well, apparently I'm going into depth on the interview panels. I'd forgotten I'd put this slide in. Yeah, okay. I'll talk a little bit more about this then. So we have, yeah, as I said, we have one panel where we're focusing on the academic skills, the kind of classic things that you might expect if you're doing a bit of research on how to apply for a PhD online. And then we have 2 separate skills panels that go into these various sets of soft skills. This is essentially, all of this information is available on our website as well, along with example interview questions on the candidate resources page. So I'd definitely check that out as well if you're interested in learning more about this. Yeah, another thing, I know I've already said this, but if you are getting to interview stage, if you're really, really interested in the project, it's definitely important to get in touch with a potential supervisor and chat everything through. One kind of thing that I would say is that it's not just about you want to make sure that the project and the supervisor is a good fit for you. So it's what people say, that an interview process is 2 ways. It's not just us making sure that you're fit for the project and that you're a strong candidate. It's also that you're going to enjoy the project and you're going to get a lot out of the time that you spend doing your PhD. So that's a bit of personal advice that I would give to everyone here. I've already mentioned that we're doing competency-based interview questions, that it might be helpful to use the STAR technique. There's the link to our example interview questions. And I'm going to share this, but essentially there's really good pages on Find a PhD, Discover PhDs, and the National Career Service that describe the STAR technique and how to help prepare for interviews. Yeah, let's keep going. Oh yeah, the other thing I would really like to say is that in my former role as the EDI officer, we managed to get some support for EDI initiatives within the DTP. And we've identified a few different underrepresented groups that we'd like to offer that support in a targeted way towards. And essentially, last year, we were able to ring fence 10% of our interviews and 2 studentships. And this year, that's actually confirmed. So I've not updated this, but we have minimum 2 ring fence studentships for this year, possibly a 3rd, and I need to confirm the 3rd. But we have the same support available where we've got 10% of the interview slots are going to be ring fenced for these underrepresented groups. So that's UK-based Black, Asian, and minority ethnic candidates, disabled people, and those from a disadvantaged socioeconomic background. And as part of your application, there's a link to a EDI form. If you fill that in, then you can be considered for these opportunities. So yeah, we're really delighted to be able to say that we're offering the same support as last year. I think I've just about covered everything. And as I said, there's going to be a feedback form at the end of the whole webinar, where if you sign up to essentially be on a mailing list in that form, then I can send you out the slides. and I can send you out the recording of the whole webinar as well. And you'll get links, you'll get access to all the links in the slides. So if you'd like to do that, please do. That would be great. And yeah, just there's a link to our website and our email address again for any follow-up questions. But I'm gonna stop sharing now, and we will go to our panelists. Have we got any questions in the Q&A that are unanswered so far? Just give me 2 seconds to sort my screens out. So yeah, hopefully that presentation was useful and not too long, maybe a little bit long. So I might just start off, the way that we're going to run the panel is, any questions that come in, unless they're very obviously targeted to a specific person, then it's just a free-for-all, and we might get a couple of people to give different perspectives on the same question. So feel free to just jump in, panelists. But I think I'll start off with what I think is a really, really, it might be an obvious question, but I think it's a really important one. And that is, how do you decide which PhD project is right for you? If anyone would like to have a go at answering that one.
I can start if you want.
Sure, thank you, Felipe.
I don't know if my experience is that general, but in my case, it took me a while to find the proper PhD project. I looked around everywhere in the world, not only in the UK actually, and actually it took me some years because my areas of interest changed according to what I was doing before the PhD. In my case, I was working in the industry before, so in that sense, for me, it's really important to be sure that what you're expecting to do makes sense with what you enjoy doing, and try to look in as many places as possible how those PhD projects could cover those interests you might have. And in my case also, I was looking for a project that was not too specific, but much more broad or general or applied to the industry. So I finally got to this project, which is the one I'm working in, and I'm really happy having found it. So it took me a while, but I think it's really important to be sure what you want to do in the future, what things you like, and what you enjoy doing as a professional.
Oh, that's great. And so how did you contact loads of different supervisors in that process? Was it mainly just internet research, or was it looking through the industries to find academic links? It's just really interesting because you've come at it from like the more industrial perspective.
Yeah. So I did a lot of research in the internet. I contacted a few supervisors, not only in the UK, but in a couple other countries. And in the end, I applied for this project, not only because it was the one that interested me the most, but also because the scholarship was covering the whole fees for international students, which was not a thing that was happening in other DTPs. So that was a really good alternative for me in that sense.
Yeah, and yeah, just to stress that point again, it really is all fees. We tend to get this question a lot about the difference between home and international, but apart from that rule I mentioned about the number of students we can accept, you're treated exactly the same in the DTP. We pay all the fees regardless of the fee difference. Yeah, so that's great. Has anybody else got a different, kind of perspective on how you made the decision about which PhD you went for in the end? How you made that? Yeah.
I did it in a slightly different way. So rather than choosing the project, I actually chose based on the supervisor. I actually had met my supervisor before. I did like a research placement with him during my undergrad, and so I knew that I wanted my PhD to be with him, and it was less about what the project was for me because I enjoy any part of geography. So I don't know how sort of applicable that is to everybody here, but that's another way of looking at it if you don't necessarily know specifically what project you want, is to kind of go down the university or the supervisor route, somewhere that you can really see yourself like being and living for 3.5 years.
No, it's a really interesting point, and I think I know by the way, everyone feel free to chip in if you've got things to say, but I think it's really important. I tried to stress it earlier that if you're going to have quite an intimate relationship with your supervisor, an intimate kind of professional level relationship with someone for 3.5 years, so you've got to make sure that you're comfortable in that relationship and that you want to live where the project's based and all of those other things. It's not just, I completely agree that it's not just about the academic interest side of things. It's like look at it more holistically and see your whole life and think about that as well. Yeah, that's two really, really important perspectives on that, I would say. And okay, we'll maybe move on to, has anyone here applied to a PhD project that's very different to their previous academic experience? I think, Felipe, you kind of mentioned that it was your research interest changed, but has anyone else had an experience where they maybe were doing a master's in something and then wanted to change tack for their PhD and apply to something a bit different? Or was everyone kind of going through a straight kind of path? It's maybe a slightly curveball question, but I'm trying to highlight the point that we're interested in people's potential for PhD study here. So as though many people will go down a kind of, I've done a degree in geography, I've done a master's in geography, I'm going to do a PhD in geography. We've also maybe got people who've come at it from another angle. I don't know if anyone's got any comments on that.
So I had a master's in physics, and my master's project was on condensed matter physics. So it was a completely different shift to what I'm applied for in my PhD, which was cold spells and atmospheric science. And our physics course didn't cover atmospheric physics in the university, so it was like completely new.
And how have you found that transition?
So to me, I always felt like you have 4 years to do a PhD, so you have enough time and you have enough skills to just learn this new science and this new way of thinking, because in a way, all these ideas are just applied. So as long as you know how to science, you can science in many different ways.
Yeah, so you basically exactly you're a great example here of what we're saying when, you know, as long as you can prove your potential for the study, even if you don't necessarily have, you know, you didn't have the atmospheric background for the project, but you clearly demonstrated the ability to science, as you put it, and that's a really important point for everyone here, that we encourage you to apply and just back up your experience and your enthusiasm for the project. No, thank you. I didn't know that. It's really interesting that you've done that, and I hope you've enjoyed your PhD so far. We've got a question specifically about, has anybody here done a placement of any kind so far? The one thing I didn't quite touch on in the presentation is we have a couple of different routes for doing placements. So there's the industrial placement side if you've got a case partner, there's our fund, and then UKRI also have another scheme that's open to all UKRI students across the UK to do a policy-based placement. So has anybody here got any comments on their experiences doing any of these kinds of placements during their PhDs? I realise that there's a few first years here who've maybe not quite got to that point yet.
Yeah, and I haven't done my placement yet. No.
Oh, do you have any plans so far?
Yeah. I mean, actually, the idea is to do it with my case partner. So yeah, but I still have to arrange that properly because it takes a while for them to do all the paperwork and all that, and find the best time to do it as well, because I can't do it like for 3 months. I should only take like 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah,
so you've basically got to consider the project planning. And would you say it's better to do that placement maybe when you're more settled in, then a bit later on in your study?
Yeah, exactly. My idea is to do it by the end of the second year, So like after having at least one article more or less written, and after finishing that second year, so that I can take some time to go and work with them, and then go straight to the third year.
Yeah, super. For I'm afraid I've not answered that specific question for who. I can't remember the attendee that put it in, but we have another webinar on the 13th, and we've also got a couple of recordings, and I'm pretty sure that people who were in older year groups and had done their placements talk about that as well. But so far, especially doing something with a case partner, from what I've heard, is a really positive experience, because you get to embed yourself within an industry and get that career development skills and build up a network. And the UKRI policy scheme is great. People who go on that say it's fantastic. And that's a fully funded 3-month placement for people who want to do something with policy in the related area. But again, that's more open for second years and above. So you need a bit of time to get embedded within your PhD before you start looking towards that placement side of things, because it does take up a lot of time out of your PhD. Someone's asking about advice on choosing referees. If anybody's got, or maybe even approaching referees or that side of the application process.
So I think for the references, you want someone who knows your work quite well. So if it's at uni, either like your supervisor for a project that you've done, or someone who supervised like a group project, like maybe a lecturer that you know quite well and has marked a lot of your work, or like your manager or your line manager at work if you've been in industry for a few years. Most people are really happy to give a reference, especially in academic. They, well, when I was asking some people from my undergrad and my master's, they were really keen and they really encourage you to apply for PhDs because they find that exciting. So a lot of the time, people will be more than happy to give you a nice reference to go with.
Yeah, it's great. And yeah, academics are just people, so you're welcome to just email them. I think people can sometimes be intimidated by prof on someone's name, but they are just people at the end of the day. And as long as you're polite in your email, then you can definitely ask them for a reference.
Can I make a suggestion about
Yeah.
that happened to me? Yes, sorry.
No, please jump in. It's more than welcome.
Sure. Excellent. It's just that I think we are asked only for 2 references, but I asked 3 different people for the references, 3 referees, and that worked really well because one of them took quite late. I don't even know if he managed to send it. So I just was happy that I asked 3 and not just 2, because I made sure that I would receive at least 2.
No, it's a really good point, because academics, as I said, they're people, they're busy, and if it falls on the bottom of their list, we unfortunately do have to follow like our timeline, and if the references aren't in, then that will unfortunately have a bit of an impact on the shortlisting aspect of the application. So yeah, I think asking a third one, if you've got someone in mind, is a really, really good idea. We've got a question here that I feel is probably maybe going to be best answered by Veronica, but obviously anyone else can chip in. And the question is, if you're lacking experience or techniques, how can you compensate for that in your personal statement?
So I mean, the only thing that, for example, me taking a master's in physics was the lack of prior knowledge of atmospheric science. But a lot of atmospheric science, for example, is about coding and about understanding what you like, your thinking skills, which are exactly how you're trained in undergrad to problem solve. And I mean, I had a lot of coding experience. My master's project was based on coding. So I basically like said, well, I've done this like whole coding program. I've also, I'm going to publish a paper on this. I did this. I problem solved, give some examples, what you did. And, you know, everything's applicable. So problem solving is applicable. If you can like show that you problem solve, that you have computational skills, that you have these interpersonal skills, that you've done research before, maybe not this exact research from this exact area, but if you've done it before, it's just applying that knowledge somewhere else.
Yeah, I think showcasing all of those kind of personal attributes is definitely really, really important, because it's about potential for research, and that requires things like resilience. It requires you to be able to problem solve, as Veronica's saying, and so it's not just how much Python do you know, or that obviously helps for this specific project. It might be essential, but if you can show your strengths in other ways, then that's definitely going to put you at an advantage as well. Yeah. So I'm gonna choose another question here. It's a fairly general one, but I think everyone will have a different take on it, and that is, what is the best way to get prepared for a PhD application, or for PhD applications in general? What did people do when they were preparing to do their own applications? I'm sure you guys didn't just apply to Panorama, you applied to other places as well.
Sorry. In my experience, I kind of had a look at like a load of different places that had PhDs. So I didn't just put all of my eggs in one basket. That was one thing that my supervisor told me was something I shouldn't do. Sorry. And I kind of like researched about the topics, kind of where the places were as well. So is it close to home? Is it far from home? Is it near friends? And then just kind of whittling it down from a lot of projects that I was really interested in, because I was interested in everything, to kind of trying to get down to that one little specific project, which was quite hard to do. So it's best to research everything and be interested in a lot of things, and then whittle it down to one, because then at least you've got a range of things that you can apply for.
So you basically started off with like a really open mind, and then had to sort of funnel your decisions down. Do you mind if I just ask a follow-up about what kind of was going through your head when you were making all of those decisions and weighing everything up?
It was very much, I want to do every single project, but obviously you can't. So I guess I just kind of focused in more on what sounded the most exciting, what kind of had the most fieldwork opportunities, because I thought that was really important to me, to be able to go and do some kind of cool research science somewhere else. But yeah, that was kind of mainly it. And then at the end, kind of the proximity to home kind of was the main one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so again, it's like lifestyle things that are coming in there. It's not just about the academic project. And you've raised a really good point. I actually forgot to say to everyone in my introduction that I've done a PhD as well. And I ended up doing a very lab-based PhD. And in hindsight, I should have done what you did, even consider fieldwork and opportunities to go and do science somewhere else rather than just in a windowless basement with some lasers for company, which suits some people, I'm sure. But you got to think about, do you want to be in a room with a computer all day doing modeling, or do you want to have modeling and then also field work? What kind of balance suits you? Again, I'm gonna put a fairly general question out there, which is, why did you decide to do a PhD? What was the kind of motivation factor? And that's a question you're most likely going to get in an interview for a PhD. If anybody in the audience gets to that point with any PhD funding model, then that's a question you're going to get asked. So now that these guys have got through that, what made you decide to do a PhD rather than going into industry or work? Was it something that you'd wanted to do since you were 9, or was it something that you fell into, or was it something that kind of came about at university?
So I sort of fell into it. So this is actually my second time applying to Panorama, because I'd applied the year before and I didn't get it.
Oh, is it? Well,
yeah,
congratulations, Hannah.
Yeah, so it's not the end of the world. If it doesn't go well, you can always try again next year. But I sort of fell into it because in between, after like not being successful the first time, I went and I worked for a year, and then I decided I really missed that academic community, and so I decided that I wanted to apply again. and I just like learning. So I wanted to carry on kind of developing my like technical skills. And I liked, diving quite deep into a project, and I wasn't ready to sort of give that up quite yet. And I like the fact that the PhD allowed me to do that, but it did allow me to do kind of like 9 to 5 and leave it at the door. It was a good mix of both of them. And it's just been so nice to be back in like academia, making those connections and like having that support network. So yeah,
Oh,
I
that's
guess.
great. I'm so glad that you persevered and got your project the second time round. That's really great. And I had no idea that you'd applied the year before.
Yeah.
And I think it raises a really important point. One of the skills that we're going to test people on at interview is resilience. And that idea of can you handle a little bit of failure, because research is such an unpredictable kind of environment in terms of the experiments you're doing. So I think, Hannah, you're a great example there of if at first you don't succeed, give it another good go. Does anybody have any other comments on that kind of general topic?
Yeah, I think so. I always wanted to do a PhD from like my first year of my undergrad. And I was kind of gearing up towards that. And then when I was my bachelor's project, I hated research. I was like, I hate my project. I never want to do this ever again. And then I was like, well, I don't know what to do next. So I'll just stick on and do my integrated master's. And then I loved my master's project and was like, okay, no, maybe that was just a bad experience doing my bachelor's. I do love research. And I applied for a couple of places and I got this one and it's been great. I just wanted to keep essentially doing a degree and not face the real world for a little bit. But it's been great fun. I like studying, and you essentially get paid to learn stuff, and you're at like the edge of science as well. So you're like discovering new things. It's quite exciting.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, it's an important point to say that if, it's to sample those different fields and find something that you're really passionate about. Because that's going to be the thing that sustains you through the PhD, because it is a long time to study one thing, unless you're lucky enough to get it's I think a bit rarer to get a project that's more general like yours, Felipe, because you're more likely to funnel into like a very specific avenue of research. So yeah, just bear in mind that if it's not for you, just make that decision really carefully and test out a couple of things. Like, I don't know if anyone here did like a paid internship in the summer or anything like that, but that's a great way of getting experience. Did anybody do that in the run up to their applications?
I did an internship, but I just wanted to say on like how do you decide to do a PhD? I actually think it's quite scary. Like when I was applying and I got offers, but then I was like contemplating it. I was like, well, this is 4 years of my life. Do I want to do it? Like, I am interested in research. I like new science. I like learning new stuff. But then you also have like the work. If you go into work, you'll still learn about science. So for me, from a physics degree, you could like work in nuclear defense and stuff, and you can work somewhere else, and you can work in like quantum companies. So you'd still get that science out, but you wouldn't be specifically focused on your own science. You'd be kind of working for like a company. So it was a really big decision because I didn't know what I was doing. And then someone said, well, you just have to have a leap of faith and you just have to go for something that feels right. And I didn't know, and it was scary, but sometimes you just have to commit, is what I wanted to say.
Yep, and it sounds a little bit like there was a bit of, trust your own instinct on something as well. Like, do all the logical thinking through, but then also trust your own instinct on what you actually want, which I think is important as well. So another question I thought might be useful for everyone is, what is the best piece of advice someone's given you, either during your PhD or when you're applying or anything PhD related? What's the best piece of advice that you've been given in your academic kind of journey so far?
It's not from an academic, but it was from my mum and dad, because I was constantly doubting myself about whether I'm good enough to do it, like smart enough, and they're like, well, you've gotten this far, you're obviously smart enough, capable enough, they want you to do it, so why are you doubting yourself? So it's not just thinking that the academics are thinking you're stupid and all that. They're definitely not. But listen to that advice from your parents and your family, because they know you best, even your friends and stuff like that. They know that you're good enough at it, even if you feel like you're completely failing at it. They look at what you're doing and go, that's amazing, like you're so talented, just rely on that, and that'll get you through everything.
Oh, that's great. I'm so glad your parents are supportive of you doing your PhD. That's really lovely. And yeah, exactly. Important to bear in mind that if a little bit of imposter syndrome stuff type kind of creeps in, that you can get through that, and you don't need to listen to that voice inside your head, basically, right? Yeah, anybody else got any comments on that?
At my undergrad, one of my supervisors told me the most important thing when you're choosing your PhD project is your supervisor, because Katja, as you said, you're with them for 3.5 years. You don't have to be best friends and like each other, but you have to have the same kind of working style. Like, are you going to want to meet with your supervisor once a week, or do you want to meet with them once a month, and what are they going to do? So I think if you can reach out to a supervisor and ask if you can speak to a current PhD student they have or a master's student, and kind of see from them what their supervisor style is, and see if that's going to fit with the way that you'll work. Like, are you going to work in the same kind of way? And that would be, I think, was the best piece of advice that I was given and helped me choose where to do PhD. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you speak to people in the group, you're going to get a bit of a feeling for how the group dynamic is as well, and whether you're going to fit in nicely into that space. So yeah, it's also a really important consideration. It's not just, it's a supervisor, but it's also the wider research group, and whether you can see yourself there. And talking to people in the group, you can be more, maybe a bit more informal, especially if you get to visit the department and have a look around. Anybody else got any thoughts on that, or will I move on to the next question?
I'll just jump in quickly.
Yeah,
All right.
please do, please do.
I think one of the pieces of advice that I was given also by my mum is that, it was a long time ago, but it's applied to lots of things, is that people want you to do well. So when you're applying for this PhD, your supervisors want people to fill those projects. They want you to do well. Your interviewers want you to do well. They're not there to kind of, like, they don't want you to fail at your interview. Like, they want you to do really well. So just, yeah, take confidence in yourself. But also going back to Abby's point about choosing a supervisor and building on sort of Victoria's point about, do you get a job or do you not? I was also having that problem. Like, I didn't know whether I wanted a job or not. And it kind of, the decision was made for me when my supervisor set up at really short notice a meeting with 2 current PhD students who are now in my office. And he like put us all on the call, and then he left, and I was able to chat to them, and they just solved all the worries that I'd had about moving to Leeds, about, do I like commit 3.5 years of my life to that? And I thought, if my supervisor can do that for me at such short notice before like the offer deadline came in, then like that's the kind of like relationship I want with him, because he was so lovely, and that kind of swayed me to do the PhD over choosing a job. Yeah, so that was a lot of
No,
different
it's great.
things in one.
It's great. It's really, really enforcing this idea that the relationship side of it's important. Like, I think there's a lot, people are going to have I can see from the Q&A, there's a lot of technical questions about specific application things, or what you need to apply and all this. But I think for the panel discussion, it's really important that we're talking about all the non-technical side of things as well. The kind of decision making and the fit for PhD study things. I think a lot of people, it is such a big decision. With a job, you can always hand in your notice, and obviously with a PhD, you can decide it's not right for you. You can go for an MPhil when you're partway through, but it's a different sort of commitment when you've got 3.5 years of funding and everything's all kind of laid out like that. So it's definitely important to think about all these decisions and get them right. And I'm so glad that you've got a lovely supervisor, and that decision process was made really nice and straightforward for you. We've got another question in the Q&A here about, thinking again about personal statements. Like, how did people approach their personal statements more generally? And because you're limited in your word count, right? So what sort of things how are you structuring it, and what sort of content are you putting in there to really sell yourself, as much as that's sometimes quite an awkward thing for people to do, especially in the UK culturally. How did people approach that?
In my case, well, I also did a lot of research how to write a personal statement, and I think I tried to organize it in what I've done what are my motivations, why I feel motivated to do a PhD, and what I expect to do while doing the PhD. What are my goals regarding the project I'm applying to, and try to put that in a way that sounds. It's not just a point, like several points of ideas, but in a way that sounds interesting for who's reading it. So I try to focus on not only putting the content there, but also making it interesting for the reader. And yeah, and as I said, I did some research about what should be contained in there, and looked at a lot of examples for them to make sense. I hadn't done that before, so it was useful.
Yeah, and the internet's got so much to say on there's even templates out there that you can follow to make that process a bit easier, because it is sort of, there's an art to going through interview and recruitment in itself. And so yeah, definitely use the internet to make sure that you can structure it and keep it concise and keep it engaging, and yeah, demonstrate your skills basically. I definitely think that's good general advice for any kind of process, whether that's for a PhD or for a job. People are usually quite time poor when they're going through all these applications, so it's important to try and, yeah, as you say, Felipe, make it engaging, so that it's properly considered and you really are given the best of yourself in quite a concise bit of text. Anybody else got any thoughts on personal statements? Because it's kind of the one opportunity you get that's not, a degree transcript, to show a bit of bit of yourself before you get to that interview stage.
I was going to say it's really important to back everything up with examples. So I know, Cassie, you were talking about the STAR technique for interviews, but I do like to use it in my applications as well, because even if you think you're being sort of explicit about something, if you don't, I find when I'm not using the STAR technique, I'm not being like explicit about it. And although it is hard to sell yourself, it's really important just to make it really, really obvious about what you can bring to this PhD, like what experience you have, and then just get someone to read it. I think if you can get like somebody maybe technical in academia or something to read it, but then also get like your family or your friends or somebody who has no idea about this kind of thing to read it and give you some feedback, and that I found really gave me like a good balance. I think my mum had to read it like 10 times or something before I submitted it. But yeah, I would definitely use the STAR technique. And then at the end, I hadn't put like a little summary in. And I think my previous supervisor basically said, add a sentence at the end, just kind of summarizing it all up. And that really brought it to quite a nice conclusion.
Yeah. And can I just ask a follow-up? So specifically, was your mom reading it? What benefit was it for you to get a technical person and a layman? What could you just like go into a little bit more detail of why that was useful for you?
So I think the technical person was quite helpful because when I sort of described a bit about the project and then the experience that I had, they could tell if I was using the right terminology and everything. But I think in everything I do, even in my PhD, it has to be understandable by someone who's not in science. Like, to me, that's the whole point of, so someone, I would like my, I don't know, grandparents to be able to read my thesis and they should be able to understand it. And so when my mum read my application, I wanted to make sure that it was really clear and really obvious to somebody who is not in this field, because the people that are reading this application, they're not all necessarily going to be from the field of the project that you've applied for. So just having it really clear and really obvious to anybody is a really important skill for your PhD, and therefore, like, if you can demonstrate that in your application, it's a bonus. But it's also really important that anyone can read your application and understand and see your enthusiasm and see your experiences come through, even if they don't like know the ins and outs of that project yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. You're kind of, it's communication skill that you're demonstrating straight off the bat. And as you say, like if you can engage non-experts in your work, that's really great for linking in with industry. It's really great for linking in with policy. So it gives you a broader scope for the kind of careers or collaborations that you can have, even if you stay in academia in the future. So I think it's really important, because that's how you get your work out there as well, as by talking about it and by putting it in terms that are more easily digestible. And if you can practice that at a really early point in even before you've started your PhD, then that's setting yourself up really well for later on and for conferences and things like that. So yeah, I basically was digging for a little bit of that. So thank you, Hannah. Because I think it's a really important and kind of underrated skill in academia a lot of the time to make things more general. And that's why you've now got competitions like 3-minute thesis and things like that coming out, so that people can practice that kind of skill set. Has anybody else got any comments on that, or will I move on? I'm also trying to vaguely keep an eye on time. We've got another half an hour, but if questions dry up, I'm happy to clock off slightly early if that's been helpful for everyone. But I might ask another question that's sort of related to what we were just talking about, which is, what non-technical skills are valued most, would you say, by your supervisor or by the academic community that you find yourself in?
I would say that teamwork's quite a big one. When I'm speaking to others that have done interviews and stuff, they always say that teamwork was something they either get asked about or they forgot to talk about, and in their feedback they said maybe they could talk about that a bit more. So I think that's a really big one, because at the end of the day, you are working in a research group. You've got to get along with others. Even if you might not like them the most, you've still got to be professional and treat them with respect and work with them day to day. So you need to be able to work quite well within a team, especially for collaboration of ideas, because you're not just going to be the one with all the ideas. Everyone's going to have ideas coming together. But yeah, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, no, definitely, especially if you're working in like a fieldwork or a lab-based environment and you're not just you and yourself and your computer. Teamwork is going to be absolutely essential. It's like the flip side to independence. It's like you need independence, but you also need to negotiate and have teamwork skills and communication skills and all that other stuff. Anyone else got a thought on non-technical?
Yeah, I think one thing is making sure you're organized with everything. So obviously it's 3.5 years long. You're going to read so many papers. How are you going to keep all that track? You're going to have a lot of data. How are you going to manage that data? Another thing is like time management, because there's no like, it's not like an undergrad and you've got deadlines that you work to. You've got like a transfer and you've got your viva at the end of your thesis submission. But like that's a year and then 3.5 years in. So you've got to find, are you going to be able to self-motivate yourself to stick to a schedule that you set out? I think that's really important to make sure you don't end up drowning in it. It's quite a good skill, but yeah.
Yeah, one bit of advice someone gave me, which was really helpful, was that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So you should slow the pace down, because you don't want to burn out in the first few months. And as you say exactly, Abby, you don't have the same constant feedback loop that you get at undergraduate or at top postgraduate, of assessments and grades and things kind of telling you where you're sitting. You've got to be able to be a bit more independent and make your own judgment about how well you're doing, because essentially what you're doing is you're a project manager for your own PhD project. It's another way to look at it. So it's like your first foray potentially into project management skills, but just for yourself rather than so it's slightly different. You've got to be a bit more introspective and realistic about the goals that you're setting. Would you agree with that, Abby, so far for your?
Yeah, I think so. And I think as well, being realistic with goals, like don't set yourself that you're going to finish a PhD in like 2 years. That's not going to happen. Or like be realistic with how long it's going to take to do something, because otherwise if you set too high ambitious goals, you're just going to get demotivated. And you need to, yeah, it's quite hard to learn how to set achievable goals, but there is some training on the Panorama program we've done about
Yes.
that. So helpful.
Yeah, so that's a thing I maybe should have stressed a bit more, but the fact that we offer the cohort-based training is yeah, fairly unique for a DTP or a similar thing called a CTT kind of model. And since Panorama is such a broad DTP, we've got people who go to the Antarctic, and then we've got people who sit and do modeling, and they don't need to leave the office at all, or their house. We offer a lot of personal development skills training, and that's why I'm really trying to, in the application stage, talk about a lot of the personal skills. It's why we focus on that in the recruitment and in the interviews, is because we're then going to hone that in the training program and set you up for careers going forward, and not just looking at academic careers. So it's really important. And yeah, project management's a huge thing in there. You know, I've gone from talking a little bit about myself now, but I've gone from doing PhD, did a very brief postdoc, worked in EDI, and now I'm essentially a project manager. So and I'm applying the skills that I learned in my PhD all the time. And another thing I think, Abby, that you touched on that's really important is this idea that, yeah, setting achievable and realistic goals, because otherwise you're going to feel an inflated sense of failure. And a lot of academics are just eternally optimistic about timescales. I don't know if I'm seeing a few nods there, but they're eternally optimistic about how long things are going to take. And I think that's what keeps them invested in the research. But as a PhD student, I think it's important to set a kind of line in your head of, okay, I think this is going to take this long, and so I'm going to add 30% extra time to that, or whatever extra, to be more realistic about the expectations, because the very nature of research is you do not know what's going to come next, and you don't know how something's going to go, and that's what keeps it interesting. But it also is the thing that makes it quite difficult when you're new to that environment as well. Does anybody else want to? I've basically talked about myself there for a bit, so I don't know if anyone else has any comments on that.
Yeah, I wanted to emphasize the project management skills, both for the interview stage. Maybe it's really important to show that you have some experience managing projects, even though it's something small, even though it's in the undergrads, but it's quite useful, because when you get to the PhD, I've seen that supervisors love that you have project management skills, that you can show them a plan, and that plan can be adapted. It doesn't matter, but they love when they see a Gantt or when they see a schedule of things that you're expecting to do. And that is also useful, I think, because of what you were saying the last. Sometimes supervisors expect you to do a lot of things, but if you show them that you're going to do this, this, and this on these times, then they can't suggest anything more. Like you have everything done. And with that, I want to do, just for a short little final point, initiative is also really important. Like don't stop waiting for the supervisor to tell you what to do, but bring the ideas yourself. You can discuss them, of course, and they can change, and there could be more ideas, but bring the ideas yourself, and bring new things to read. Send them more information. I try to send them papers I'm reading every week. So yeah, keep the initiative always there.
Yeah, exactly. And also, like, it gives you this chance to say, if you might disagree with your supervisor on how something should be approached or whatever, then you can take the initiative and say, no, this is, I'm going to test this my way. That's where the independent side of it comes in. Is this is your own work, it's your own project, and that you can put your own spin on it. You're not just following instructions. I see a few people, Veronica and people, are nodding heads at that. So yeah, just to emphasize that point. Yeah, it's a good one. Anyone else got any comments on any of that at all?
I was going to say, one really good skill to have is enthusiasm. People love enthusiastic people. Enthusiasm is contagious. When your supervisor thinks you're enthusiastic, they're like, oh, they're doing a good job, they want to do this job. It sends the right message across, especially like in your interview, if you're getting interviewed by your supervisor, they want to know that you actually want to do this project and you're not just trying to find a random PhD. Because I've heard like people before saying, oh, I don't know if they want to do this PhD or they just want to do a PhD. So, read papers, be like, oh, I'm really enthusiastic about this specifically, and I like this, and I read this, and that's quite interesting as well.
Yeah, I think it's like the number one opening you're almost always going to get if you're asked. It's like, why do you want to do this PhD? What is the motivating factor? And motivation is one of the skills that we're testing here, because you do have to be passionate to commit to something like this for 3.5 years. It does take that kind of level of dedication, and of course there's going to be moments of frustration with a project, and there definitely will be, but I think you're totally right, Veronica, that having that motivation is going to really like nourish you through that. And yeah, a supervisor will definitely want to see enthusiasm, 100%. And an interviewer will find the conversational flow much more easily if there's enthusiasm. And yeah, talking of interviewers, there's a question that I meant to ask earlier, and then it's only just reoccurred to me now. What would you, what questions would you ask the supervisors? What questions would you ask the interviewers? What do you think is important to ask them rather than answering yourself? People say at the end of an interview, it's good to have a question ready to ask them. Did anyone do that in their interview process, or has anyone got any ideas of what they would ask?
So I always struggle with this, like what question should I ask at the end of the interview? And I think a lot of people struggle with that as well. So I actually asked my supervisor before I went for my interview, and he suggested asking them, what kind of advice do you have, like for someone, or when you were in my position, like what advice do you now have for me? Because it ends the interview with them talking about themselves, which is a quite nice way for them to look back on it. But before I came to the session, I also asked my office because I was wondering if they had any good suggestions, and someone in my office suggested, it's all about the way that you frame your question. So he asked, I want a career in academia. That's why I'm doing this PhD. And so I'm really interested in kind of seeing if there's any lecturing or teaching opportunities. So he basically asked, will there be an opportunity to demonstrate alongside it? But he framed it in such a way that it reinforced his like enthusiasm and motivation to do the PhD. So I think it's definitely something to think about in advance before the interview. But if you can just pull out 1 or 2 questions, you'll just have them at the back of your head, because if you're like me, when they ask that question, I just go completely blank if I don't have something prepared.
Yeah, and you're obviously like make notes, do prep, so that you feel comfortable with everything that's happening. That's really important. And yeah, I think the framing side of it's a really interesting point to make, because you could phrase that question as, are there any teaching opportunities? And that would be it. But putting that little bit of kind of precursor around, this is the route I want to go down because I'm motivated there, and so are there any of these opportunities? It gives a completely different spin. So you're kind of 2 birds, 1 stone there. Yeah, has anybody else got any thoughts on the types of questions that they would ask an interviewer or ask a supervisor when they're going through something like this? Or if you could go back in time and you maybe didn't do it at the time, what you would do now? Or had you already done all of your kind of research for your projects?
In my case, I asked the question Hannah mentioned, the second one, like about demonstrating, but I still felt like I didn't have much time at the end of the interview to ask many things. So it was quite quick just to close the interview. But yeah, at least we closed the interview without me talking, but them saying something to me. So that was a good one. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if the conversation interview is going so well that you're running out of time, that's not always a bad thing. We've had another last minute question here about, I don't know if anyone really remembers. I mean, maybe the first years are best place to ask this, but about what are the most important questions you felt that were asked of you in the interview? Because the older year groups may have had a slightly different interview structure with a more traditional 1 panel kind of situation, but you first years had the 3 short panels. So is there any particular question that struck you in that process that maybe you weren't expecting or was important for you to answer correctly?
So I had a question. It was about like what's a time that you've faced a difficulty in research in the past and how did you overcome that? And I think that's really important to know because things will go wrong in a PhD at some point. It's 3 years, it's research, things are bound to go wrong. And I kind of want to know how you're going to recover from that. So what I said is I said what went wrong, I said what I did, and then using the STAR technique reflected like, well, what did I do? What did I learn from that experience? And if something happened again, how would I then go forward? And I think, yeah, I think with any question, just using that kind of reflection and kind of saying what you would do better next time to show that you're learning from things that have happened, I think is something that they're really looking for in the interviews as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I realize I've talked a lot about the STAR method without maybe giving the context for what that actually is for people who've never heard of that before, but it's widely researchable online, and it essentially stands for situation, task, action, and result. And you use that structure when answering questions, or as Felipe said in his personal statement, was it you that said that, right? Yeah, I think so. Someone said that they, in their personal statement, used the STAR technique to kind of structure the way that they'd talk about things and make sure that you give concrete examples. And yeah, even the UK government has a kind of page on the STAR method. So for people who are unfamiliar with that technique, if you struggle with thinking of things on the spot, or you feel more comfortable with that structure, it's a really clear, concise way of getting an answer across when you've got a limited time frame. And so yeah, I think that's, yeah, they've got links to all this sort of stuff in the slides that are going to be going out, but just to give that context maybe a little bit. Yeah, we are at coming up to Q2. I'm gonna keep an eye on the Q&A for another couple of minutes. If people have got burning questions that they want answered before we start wrapping up, get them in now. I'm gonna just give that a little second. And oh, Hannah's jumping in. Go for it. You're welcome to interrupt me, by the way.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing that I didn't realize that has actually been such an important part of my PhD so far. I think is very panorama specific. So compared to applying for a PhD, maybe traditionally compared to applying for it with Panorama, in the future I would 100% always go with Panorama because it has this kind of social aspect which I didn't really think about. So because they fund a cohort, there's 26 people in my year, and I could go to any single one of them with like an issue, or just for a chat, and they're all going through the same thing that I am. And it's become such a good support network. Whereas I think traditionally you might just have your support network of your office, but if you apply through something like Panorama, you have your office, you have this really interdisciplinary, really broad spread of people that you could just go for a chat, and we've become like such good friends. And I think it's really important to have that cohort, and that's something that I didn't think about but has actually so far just made my PhD. So if you're debating whether or not to apply for something like a DTP versus just applying for funding, so far I would always go with the DTP option because it's really made these past few months. So.
Oh, I'm so pleased to hear that, Hannah. And yeah, it's something I maybe should have stressed a bit more, but you know, we take all the first years on an induction. So Abby, Hannah, and Eve have just recently been on their induction. And then yeah, the events through the year, we're having a Christmas social next week. I know that we have PGR reps for Panorama. So we've got students who sit on our steering committee and so they can be the student voice and raise things to me and Sebastian. And we get them to they've set up a buddy scheme. They're in the middle of setting up a buddy scheme for first years, which happens every year. And we get them to set up a WhatsApp chat for each new cohort as they come in. So that's not like something that I have any involvement in. There's no staff presence in that space, but we facilitate that so that there's a space to ask the kind of, you know, where should I live? What area of Leeds, what area of York is good to live in? All that kind of informal help that you might want to get that maybe your parents can't help you with, or you're just not sure especially if you're moving country. So we try to provide a bit of support there, the pastoral side that's distinct from the university or from the research group. And yeah, the training is basically there to bring everyone together. It's not just about learning skills, it's about the networking, meeting everyone in your cohort, having different conversations. Again, we got everyone to practice talking about their PhD, and you've maybe got a biologist who's having to talk to a geophysicist, and so it's a different kind of layer of support and different skills that you're practicing, and you never know, you might learn a different technique that you can then incorporate in your PhD. So you're getting various different things there, whether it's academic support on a different level or kind of pastoral support. So yeah, it's one of the things that makes a DTP different. And the other thing I should want to just stress, I think I mentioned it earlier, but because we are governed by the UKRI umbrella and NERC and everything like that, our stipend is set at that rate, and it's basically usually more generous than if you were to get an individual university scholarship with a university. And that's basically another way of it's better support, essentially, because all of the terms and conditions are laid out by UKRI. So there's things like sick leave and paid sick leave incorporated within your studentship. So it's important if you're applying to other PhDs as well, just to check that kind of thing in the funding. But yeah, thank you, Hannah, for bringing that up. And I'm really glad that you're having a good time so far. So that's great. And we've got a handful of minutes left. Someone's asked the last minute question here in the Q&A, and it is, what are your top tips for making your application stand out or for enhancing your chances of being accepted?
I think it goes back to what Veronica and Felipe were saying earlier about just trying to make that enthusiasm come through the paper and being proactive and using your initiative. Yeah, if you can just show how much passion you have for research of your project, then that will come through out of the paper, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, Veronica, on you go.
I was just going to say, yeah, make sure you read papers on the topic you're studying, so you have the general idea of like what is the novel ideas so far and what is the current progress in the field, because that's important and that'll make you stand out.
And I would also like to point out the importance of talking to the supervisors before the interview, and even before applying to the project, like before any application is sent, because they will help. At least they help me a lot with the main ideas of the project, which are asked in the interview, and which you can also put in your personal statement. You should, I think. And they can also help you with more references or papers to read, as Veronica was saying. So yeah, that point, I think it's really, really helpful as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to stress it. Please get in touch with the supervisor if you've got any interest in the project. Get in touch with them and make it clear that it's because you're interested in applying to the project. Make sure that context is kind of explained in your email. It's the main reason, and we know that other funding programs are starting, some of them choose to go down an anonymous application route for equality, diversity, and inclusion purposes. The main reason we don't is because the supervisor relationship is so important, and you need to be able to set that relationship, even, yeah, as you say, before you start the application. And instead, we have opportunities through the process to highlight any kind of contextual information that you want to add about to help with your application. So we've considered all of this, and on balance, the supervisor relationship is so important, and it can really give you a feel for whether you're going to work well and going to enjoy that environment. So getting in touch with them is definitely a really important thing to do. And it, as Felipe is saying, it means you get a better understanding of the project, and then you know how to focus your research and efforts, and then you can make yourself shine in the application and in the interview as well. So I hope that's answered that question. The Q&A is now currently blank, so if anyone got any burning last minute things to pop in there. We've got 8 minutes of time left. And if not, I'm happy to wrap up 5 minutes early and get everyone. It's quite a long session, but hopefully it's really useful for everyone. The last thing that I will do is pop the feedback form in the chat if I can. I'll be sending that out to everyone who's attended on the Eventbrite by email as well, but we'd really, really appreciate it if you could fill in the feedback form. It helps us understand what we maybe need to make clearer or refine this for next year. And we've got, we're going to be doing exactly the same thing at the second webinar on next Wednesday, but if you really want to come again, more than welcome. And we've got the recordings from last year's webinars online as well for people who are, we're going to make this recording available as well for anybody who wants to kind of go back and reflect and look back on everything. And in the meantime, if you have any other questions, you're more than welcome to get in touch with us. I'll pop our email address in the chat as well. Hopefully everybody can see that okay. Oh, I see someone's asked, okay, I'll answer that question for you. There's one question in the Q&A. Is publishing a paper necessary to get accepted? Absolutely not. It's a bonus. If you have a paper, that's obviously going to demonstrate really, really good research experience, but it's absolutely not mandatory at all. And it's what I've tried to stress is if you haven't even done a master's, the minimum qualification requirements for us are 2-1 bachelor's or equivalent. But if you've then gone into industry and done things that are kind of going to demonstrate that you've got a good potential for research, or you've done some research in your work, you can, as long as you can translate all of that experience into your application, that's completely fine. It needs to be competitive, probably with roughly a master's level, because a lot of our applicants have that, but you do not need it. You just need to have an equivalent kind of work or industrial experience, and then have the ability to translate that into your application. Hopefully that makes sense. And I presume, Felipe, you've had some experience of that, given that you were in work before your PhD.
Yeah. Actually, I was gonna mention that in the interview, I was asked about my research experience, and I gave them an example about my experience while working in the industry, because I had the chance to do some kind of research, like my work was a bit of research for the company. So yeah, I used that as an example, and I didn't have any papers before or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's really important to just, really stress that point. We more than welcome people who've come through the more traditional academic route, but we equally welcome people who've gone and done work, and they tend to bring a very different set of perspectives and experience to the table, and that's actually really valuable to have that mix of people in the cohort. And you can definitely use that to your advantage as well, if you've got, especially if you've got research in the workplace kind of experience. And we've got one more live. We've got, then maybe make this the last live question. Depending on how things go, but we've got, how do you prevent repeating yourself in your CV and your personal statement? So I guess, how do you make those things distinct, and how do you keep them concise and really use them to your best advantage?
I think in my CV, I spoke a lot about the project I was going to be doing specifically, whereas in my personal statement, I spoke a lot about the project, whereas I didn't mention that as much or at all in the CV, because the CV is about what you've done and the personal statement is about what you want to do. So my personal statement was very much, this is a project and this is the skills I have specifically that would be used for the project, whereas the CV is just kind of a list of your qualifications and like your key skills from each thing. But I definitely say my personal statement was more looking to the future and kind of like what I wanted to do compared to my CV, which was past.
Yeah, I actually quite like, I've never really thought about that, but that's a good way of splitting it up, that your personal statement is future forward looking and motivation focused, and then your CV is like, here's all the evidence of skills or qualifications that I have to back up what you're then kind of saying in the personal statement. Does anybody else have a comment or take on that?
I did mine like completely opposite, which probably just highlights that there's no right way to
Mhm.
kind of write it. There's a lot of overlap between my CV and my personal statement because I used the examples from my CV in my personal statement. But obviously I talked about them a lot more in detail and have tailored them as to why that applied to the project. But I just made sure not to repeat myself within the personal statement by maybe using like 3 or 4 or 5 different examples. So I wasn't talking about the same one each time, but it lined up with my CV. So yeah, 2 different methods, but yeah, they both seem to have worked.
No, exactly. There isn't, there's advice online and formulas and templates, but yeah, again, as long as you can demonstrate it and it's logical and it's clear, there isn't a totally right way of doing it. And am I right, Hannah? You were the one that said that you used, I'm trying to remember, but someone said that they used the star technique in the answers, and yeah, it was you. So you're keeping it concise, and that's how you're not repeating yourself, and that's how you're not waffling and wasting the word space, right?
Yep.
So yeah, exactly. And that, as long as you can do that and you're confident and you show everything, there isn't the right way of doing it. You can approach it in different ways. And that bit of advice for the panelists, the same thing goes for your thesis. As long as it's clear and logical, it doesn't matter how you structure it. People have this idea that it's that there's only one right way to do it. And research, the really amazing thing about research is that you have such a different so many different approaches and such a variety of different things depending on what field you're in. And it's just about being confident and knowing your stuff. So I think, yeah, that's maybe the type of thing that you can take to application stage and interview as well. Okay, we've got 1 minute. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And thank you so much to all of our panelists. I hope that was useful for everyone. As I said, the feedback form link there is in the chat. Our email address is in the chat. Please fill in the feedback form. We'd be really, really grateful. It's deliberately very, very short, so it will not take up much of your time at all. And you use that feedback form to sign up to the mailing list so that basically I can send you out the slides and the recording. The recording is going to go on YouTube. So as soon as that's all processed, I'll send you the link to the YouTube. And was someone saying the chat's disabled? Can people not see the chat? Thank you for pointing that out. I had done the very classic rookie mistake of sending it only to the hosts and the panelists and not to everyone. The University of Leeds uses Teams, so whenever I transition to Zoom, there's always at least one problem. But mostly we've gone smoothly. Can people see that now? I think, Elaine, if you can see that, would you mind taking your hand down as a kind of sign that you've seen that? Hopefully everyone can see that now. The link to the feedback form and our email address. Is that, yeah, okay. We've got no one notifying me that there's a technical issue still, so great. Apologies for that. Cool, yeah, as I was saying, if everyone could fill in the feedback form, that's your opportunity to put yourself up on a mailing list so that you can get all the resources afterwards. And then our email address is there. You're welcome to ask questions. But I'd encourage you to look at the website as well first, because there's a lot of resources on there. I'll just link that now. There's loads and loads of stuff about the technical side of the application, and also the email address for the team that processes the applications for if you have any really specific questions about the portal. They're best directed to that team rather than to us. And yeah, hopefully that's all been helpful for everyone. And I'd like to just thank Sebastian as well again, who has, I've been watching, keeping an eye on that Q&A, and he's been beavering away answering all the technical questions in the background. So thank you so much, Sebastian, for doing that and for your time for that. And also thank you so much to all the panelists for your time and your expertise. I think it's so important to get like the lived PhD student experience for these sorts of events. So thank you so much, and for bringing everything like that to the table. And yeah, thank you everyone for coming. Hopefully that's been useful for everyone, and hope you have a really lovely rest of your day. Bye everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.